everyone. I'm Jimmy. I'm the head of engineering over at a company called Airtable. If you haven't heard of us, we're a no-code, low-code platform that really enables like less and non-technical people to build applications, generally for your business. Really the sort of way I describe what we do is that there are so many people that lack the access or the ability to have tools, software, workflows, automations, whatever it is, that kind of suit not just their specific function, but also the culture of the team that they have and the way that they want to work. Airtable really empowers those people, right? We want to make it so that you don't need access to any of us here in the room. We're expensive. There's not very many of us. We often have to say, no, we can't help you because we're building the products that our companies are. And so Airtable really wants to provide those folks the avenue to really express what they need to and make their jobs a lot more effective through software. And so I've been at Airtable for 5.5 years now, going on 6. I joined when we were pretty small. It's about a 100-person company at that point, about 30 engineers. We had like 1 or 2 like designers at the time who were writing a ton of code on that front. Today we're about 750 people. Our product development org is about 250 individuals, and we have PMs, we've got designers, we've got engineers now today. And so I've been along for that entire journey, and it's been a really exciting thing to see the team grow and really be a part of the culture, both in terms of like, the types of things that we value, the way in which we build product, and also those processes and what it looks like to build a sort of product from 0 to 1 in an ever-shifting sort of industry. As it relates to this, very specifically, we've been building a ton of AI product for our customers as well. And so over the last couple of years, just to kind of set a little bit of context, we've been, developing. We have about, 30-40% of our organization right now building AI features for our customers. Just to put a couple of examples of the sorts of things that we've been building, early 2023, we started a little bit of a grassroots, like, hey, let's grab this LLM technology, let's see what we can do with it. We launched, what we called our AI fields, which are essentially the ability to like try to prompt, enrich that with the data that you sort of have within your applications, and get responses based off that. There's a lot of like really powerful things that you can do. It provided a lot of, indirect and direct access to the models that are out there to a lot of our builders. We then went and shipped something we call Co-Builder. Co-Builder is the ability to build your applications in sort of natural language, right? So we can take away the complexity of understanding what a schema is and how relationships work and how you should build a good UI. And really you can just come in and say like, hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm on the marketing team at this company. We really need to build a bunch of campaigns that we're going to ship internationally. We need to deal with differences of language and time zone and whatever else it is, and it'll build that application for you so that you can track, you can do your critiques, do all the rest of it in a way that's a lot more natural, really removing even the complexity that we have in trying to build for these like low technical users. And then lastly, we just recently released our assistant. This allows you to then interact with that data in a more abstract way, right? You can do analysis, you can ask questions about your various data, you can continue to build things, and it really gives you an opportunity to generate memos, really look at insights, and sort of gather a lot of that kind of in collaboration with the application directly. And so, we've been building a lot of these features at Airtable. Really what I'm coming to you today to talk about is how we've had to shift the way that we build products, like what that looks like from both a team level, right? What are the different processes? What are the ways that we've changed the way in which our product design and engineering, individuals have worked together, and as well as talk a little bit about like the individual changes that any person on our team has had to make to sort of adapt to this. And so really I want this to be a little bit of a sense of like, hey, here's some learnings. I'm going to give some really concrete examples of things we've done, just to give folks a sense of ways in which they can approach this, and also probably just a chance for you to sort of like reflect on some of the ways in which you've had to change the ways that you're doing, or why some of the things you've done maybe don't work, and why new techniques will. To get into that, I want to just set like a little bit of context. I've heard a couple of people mention some of this too, but just kind of want to give a little bit of context to sort of like these really big industry shifts that have happened over the last 20 years on this front. As you can see on the board, there's probably like 3 sort of major shifts that have come into like product development in the last 20 years. I think they officially say 2004 is when Web 2.0 came in, and this was really that shift from like prepackaged software, you buy software, maybe it's on-prem, whatever it is, like you buy something once, you maintain it yourself, you run it, or you just install it on your computer, to sort of cloud software, right? This is your Facebook, this is your Salesforce, this is, I guarantee you that all of you are likely building this type of software today on the web. And this is a huge shift, right? It changed everything about how we do software, right? You didn't go from these like year-long cycles where everything had to be perfect and you would, deliver it to, hey, I can make a change every day, right? Every week, every month, depending on what it is. And that massively changes the way that everything we do, right? You talk about these sort of like agile approaches. None of that was really possible when it's like, hey, you have 12 months, you're going to ship this thing and you're done, and then you're going to move on, right? And so a lot of us have worked in this industry through this. The one that I imagine a lot of you have seen the shift of, if not in working, definitely in terms of like interacting with it, was really when mobile devices became sort of a standard sort of approach, right? The iPhone release 10, 12 years ago, whatever it was, really shifted the way in which all of us build products. I was already a software engineer working pretty heavily in that, and I remember it was like such a large shift to be like, okay, what do we do with these things? Do I just like build the same app? Do I just like make it look small? Does it need to be a totally separate app? Facebook, famously didn't move directly to building iPhone apps specifically because they thought it wanted to stay on the web. And so there's been a huge amount of shift that's come here. I think it honestly took 5-6 years for us to actually get a sense for like, okay, when should it be on a phone? When should it be responsive? When should it like do different things? And I think most of us are probably in a place where we kind of understand and have good best practices, right? When you come to a new product, you kind of know and you have good intuition. You have these sort of processes that will enable you to build for either or both, depending on what that is. And so these LLMs come out. It's been 2-ish years since probably most of us have started to interact with it, and we're seeing the same type of shift here, right? Whereby essentially most of and all of the best practices that we're used to building don't really apply particularly well. I promise you that like if I'd gone back 5 years and asked honestly, any product developer in the room, like, hey, like, do you think a chat box is going to be the right like user interface of like the biggest products in the world? You're going to go, absolutely not. Like, that's the last thing on the planet that anyone wants. And yet, here we are, where a lot of these products are essentially a chat box. And so I think that the thing that kind of is really important to realize is that, like, you do need to take that step back, recognize that a lot of what you were used to just doesn't really apply anymore. And how do you kind of figure that out? How do you work within a mode where this stuff is changing? And so I want to talk about 2 high-level things before we get into the process. One, and this shouldn't bear too much repeating, but I really think it is, which is that like ultimately, you work for a business, you're building something for customers, and you really want to find value. I think that like everyone knows that, sort of inherently that what you're doing is building for value. I think it becomes really easy, especially right now, for you to get caught up in a lot of the like shallow use cases of AI. There's a lot of stuff that's just like really cool, right? You like write some prompt, it's pretty miraculous that it can do something. You can show how much progress you can make in like a couple of days on that front. But the reality is that like if you can do that in a couple of days, so can all of your competitors. Like that's not going to be a differentiator. It might not even be relevant to the sort of strategy of your business or the problems that you're trying to solve. And so I think it's really, really important right now that while you should play, and I'll use that term a lot today, it's really important to root that in the actual value. You need to have some unique differentiator in sort of your business and what you provide and what you do, and really apply AI to that and not get caught up in just like the me too of like, oh, I can go and do that as well. We can have an image generator. It's like, does that matter for your product? Like, how does it actually fit in? What does that actually look like? And so really come back to how are we providing unique value? What do we have to give to our customers that kind of really aligns with the technology? The next one, and this is more of a personal one, and I think this is really important, not just for you in the room, but for your teams especially, which is that like you need to ensure that you and everybody that is working on these products have their own like aha moment when it comes to using this technology. I've found that there's been, a reasonable amount of skepticism around like, do I really need this? Like, is this just a fad? Is this just something that like is going to come and go? And it was like relatively difficult early on to get our teams really adapting to using LLM technology to really just like investigate and play with these things. And the thing that like works every single time is when that individual like has their aha moment with something that they do, right? Like if you're an engineer, you go and write, some code and it can kind of find and fix things for you, right? Or you're using some tool and it enables you to do something that would normally take 8 hours in 20 minutes, right? Whatever that is, make sure that you and everyone on your team is using the various tools to really unlock that moment where you're just like, oh, actually, this is pretty special. Because at that point, it really changes your mindset. It really enables you to sort of engage more effectively in building products on this way. And you want to keep having these. I continue to have these sort of like aha moments. Even last week, I was building out a sort of like a personal coding project. I don't write code very much anymore by any means, but I'm doing this like weird thing in Mac OS, and I just couldn't figure it out. I spent an hour looking on the internet. I've been on the internet since I was 10 years old. Like, I'm pretty good at searching for things. Couldn't figure out how to do this thing. It wasn't really a code thing. It was just like some weird like compliance thing. So I throw all this stuff into Claude, ask this really broad question, and it comes back not just with the answer, but literally a step-by-step guide of like, hey, you need to go 3 steps deep into Xcode and click this like weird archaic button that'll enable you to do this sort of thing. And I think that like that sort of moment where like you can't even find these answers, knowing what you're doing is a really just impressive mode. And I think like making sure that you continually have those will really get you motivated into doing similar things within your own products. Okay, cool. And so I touched on this a little bit. Really where I want to start from, how our teams have started to engage with this is really on this like fundamental shift of like how the design and product design has changed kind of with AI. Ultimately, the thing that I kind of want to get across as a sort of top level to all of this is that you really want to shift from like learning as you like ship products and learning to as you play. Right? Everything that you sort of have like built up and understand about best principles of how people will interact with your products likely doesn't apply to a lot of these technologies. You also don't know how they work, right? Like, you've spent 10 years on a phone, you kind of know what you want to do, you can pull the refresh, you know that people are going to interact in a certain way. That doesn't really apply here. And so the thing that I would urge everyone to do is like shift your process, shift your mindset to playing earlier, get out of Figma, get out of your design tools, get out of writing docs, and really get into just like playing with the tools on that front. A lot of these LLMs are like non-deterministic, right? Like, you can't guarantee what is going to happen or what is possible unless you start to do that. And so the sooner you get into playing with the technology, the sooner you're going to actually find that moment, that little a spice that's going to make a really massive difference in the way that you're actually going to plan and develop your product after that. Very specifically, I want to kind of give an example of sort of what our process has looked like and what it looks like now, and to kind of talk through a little bit of the nuance of that. And so this is within, our product development teams. I assume all of you have something, roughly similar to this, right? There's just like a product process. You have a PRD, whatever. Somebody sits down and they're like, hey, we have this customer persona. They have this type of problem. We think it's worth this much to solve, whatever that looks like, right? Like, somebody's written a document, you probably take that to some form of review. Somebody says, cool, that sounds great. Let's go and like explore on that. And then you go into design phase, right? You probably do some user research. Maybe you put some prototypes together, you make some drawings. Maybe you do like a clickable prototype, put it in front of customers. You sort of like iterate on that. But ultimately, you really probably sit down and you think for a while about like, I understand this problem and this is how we're going to solve it. You come to a little bit of a conclusion early on before you get into a mode of like what is possible. You test that, you start building, you iterate, whatever. You probably ship the product. Maybe it's an experiment. Maybe you ship it to GA. Hopefully you're in a position where you can like iterate on that based off of user feedback and user impact of there. But ultimately, it kind of is in this process where you kind of know what you want to do. You kind of know how you want to solve it. And then you're just like, did it work or not? And then maybe you like iterate on that. I think now the biggest shift here is that what I would say is that like you really need to just start with like, what is your strategy? What are you as a company, as an org, as a team trying to accomplish? Who are you trying to accomplish it for? And then go and play, right? Go and grab some LLMs, write some prompts, grab some dummy data, do whatever you want. Build the hackiest version that is completely outside of your normal product development stack to validate what is possible on this front. Do not go into there with your preconceived expectations like, well, I think this is how it's going to work, because what you're going to end up doing is just spinning a lot, right? You might do some designs, whatever it is. It's going to get to engineering at some point. It's not going to work, or you're going to actually miss. And the thing is, the important part, you're going to miss the possibility of what was there if you just started to play early on. And I want to urge everyone in this room is that prompt engineering is not an engineering sort of problem. It's an everyone problem. Hopefully nobody needs to do prompts, 5 years from now, but today you do. If you're not in there, if you're not writing these, if you're not actually exploring what is possible, you're going to miss the potential of that. And so really get involved in that early on. Work very cross-functionally. I don't think your function matters kind of at this point. It really is about like, hey, what are we ideating on? What can work? Like, how can we figure out what is possible? At a certain point, you're going to have this like really, really special thing. You're going to be surprised what is possible, what you can get done. And then you can go into that iteration and design phase. Right? Okay, cool. So we know that it can do this. We know like various like inputs can provide this sorts of output. How do we then sort of design on that? Whether or not that's just your user experience. Maybe that's like broadening this sort of like quality. And I'll talk quite a bit about quality as we kind of get there. On that front. And then you get into what I'm now calling like productionization, because I think what you'll end up seeing is like a lot of people are probably talking about prototype, right? Go do a bunch of quick prototypes. You can prototype really quickly, prototype. And what hasn't changed between before and after is that like the gap between a prototype and productionization is still really wide. You can make something that looks and feels really good, but it's actually going to take a lot of effort to get it to that productionization. I think making sure that you call that out enables you to spend the time on like what that looks like. I want to give like one concrete example of like why this is important too. And so I talked about our code builder enables you to build applications with a bunch of natural language. When we came to this project, we were like, hey, we want to use this new technology. We think it'll be really good for building, right? Can we somehow get to that point of view of what it would be like for an individual to talk to somebody who's already a really good builder, and then them go, we got you, like we'll build it for you, right? And there was actually a lot of skepticism on the team about this. Building's really hard. We have so many different types. There's database schemas and user interfaces and layouts and workflows and automations and all these sorts of things. There's no possible way. So actually what we're going to do is like we kind of know how ML works. It's really good for recommendations, right? So the idea that they had was like, you know what, we'll just create a bunch of like pre-canned apps for marketing teams, for product teams. We'll ask them a couple questions and we'll choose the right one. They can just start from there, right? Pretty obvious sort of thing, kind of rooted in sort of the reality of technology that we've used. It was too small, right? And so what we actually said to the team was like, hey, go and spend a couple of days, go and see, how you can, write some prompts, how you can kind of engage with this, just from the root level of like, can you actually develop the schemas we need, the user interfaces, and all the rest of it. The team did this after, quite a bit of pushing, to be perfectly honest, at that point. What they kind of came back with in a few days was like miraculous on that front, because what it actually could do was actually develop the entire application for you in like quite a lot of detail, right? It had already ingested a ton of stuff about Airtable, and would you believe database schemas and relations, like it's a pretty standard concept. These LLMs already understand. So it was actually able to come back with a very, very full-featured app based off of, pretty high-level prompts that you can kind of go back and forth on. And so what it really allowed us to do is completely change the way in which we were going to build, our co-builder experience to a level that is pretty awesome. I'm sure you've all seen a bunch of this stuff recently. And that only comes from the ability and the willingness to just get in there and play to see what is possible before you decide what is the right thing to do. So at that point, you have an idea. I am an engineer, traditionally. I wanted to sort of, take this in a little bit of a side tangent to talk a little bit about like productionization, like what's different, what's hard about building AI products, what are the sorts of things that we need to shift in both the culture and the way that we like develop and work through these problems, because I think there's like a lot of practical advice that probably a bunch of us are running into right now that I think is like pretty interesting and kind of similar, but also like quite a different lens. And so I'm going to talk through some of these processes that you'll need to go through to productionize and ship something at scale using a lot of LLM technology. The first thing I'll start with is that humans are pretty non-deterministic. LLMs are too. Generally speaking, when you write code, you put in, input X, you expect input Y. If it doesn't happen, you have a bug, you fix it, right? But the computers do what you tell them to do, ultimately. LLMs aren't quite that way, right? Like they hallucinate, quite often. They can take a broad range of different inputs, and so you can never be really, really confident about what the output is going to be. And as a result of that, the quality can vary wildly in terms of, what you're building. And I'm sure you've seen this. You can run the same prompt multiple times and get completely different answers, which is not super helpful, right? Like you really want to focus on that. And really the answer to that, and you probably started to hear about this, and I think it's really important, are evals. Evals, like reductively, are tests, right? You say, given some set of inputs, I expect it to provide some set of outputs on that front. We've had this types of tests for a long time. This is not sort of unique in this, but I think it becomes even more important in that it provides you the sort of constraints and frameworks by which you can develop your products to ensure that they solve the types of problems for the varied types of input that you're actually going to get from users. And so the thing that I would say to everyone here is like, this is not an engineering problem. This is not a technical problem. This is something that like everyone in this room, from PMs, from designers, should be thinking about as they go and develop. What do you expect a user to do? What are the types of ways in which they are going to interact with that? And what do those outputs look like? And you can really start to build up the sort of like foundational expectations of your product in this way. And it provides you a good framing so that you don't have teams that just start spinning, right? Because you're like, oh, cool, I can go and build an app that's really great. Oh, this person asked me to build a document. Oh, this person asked me to do this. Or this person asked me to do this. And now we're in this mode where you're just like trying to like, play cat and mouse with all these different things. And it's really, really hard to sort of like create and frame these things into a place. But if you start with that understanding of what you're trying to accomplish, you can make sure that like it comes in. So you get new people asking things, great, no problem. You go and add some new evals. New model comes out, awesome. I can go and test that really quickly. Does it perform better? Great, like the answers are better on this front. And so I really do think that like evals are going to be one of your biggest moats when it comes to quality of your product and ensuring that everybody here is really thinking about this and is engaging very, very directly with what you want to see in terms of like the product quality here. Secondly, and this one is extremely painful for designers especially, is performance. We've spent so much time over the entirety of the existence of computers of making them go fast. And they go so fast today. You know, you can go and make a search into Google across essentially the entire knowledge of like human existence. It's gonna take milliseconds to come back with answers to that. Milliseconds. And I'm sure everybody's had the experience that you go and interact with like one of these tools and it takes seconds, 30 seconds, a minute. There are tools that take hours. You know, you can go and do deep research. It's like, I got you, I'll come back tomorrow. And that is like an insane amount of performance difference in the way that things interact. And so there's this really interesting challenge now that we face, which is that like, you can't assume that it's going to be quick. You're gonna have to have your users wait for things. And this is just not a good experience. And it's something that you need to build into the product. You know, as you can see here, you know, a really common way streaming, right? So like, I'm just gonna show you what I'm doing. It's still gonna take a really long time. You're still not gonna get what you want, but you're gonna be part of the process, right? You know, maybe I can give you the first word really quickly, and so you'll start reading it, and I know you're probably pretty slow at reading, so it's fine, right? But really, like, the thing that you need to think about here is, like, how do you actually build a UX that expects and enables this sort of thing, right? Even if they get faster, it's not faster today. We don't know how much faster they're going to get over what period of time. You know, for us, a lot of the way that we've tried to tackle this is, you know, we build applications, and so what we've ended up doing is like, you know, you take this really large prompt, which is like, hey, build an app, and you break it down to these different sections. Oh, cool, like, what are the schema, what are the different tables, what are the different object types? We can start to show you, building on the screen, okay, cool, here's your people table, you know, here's your campaigns table, here's your sort of like product release table, and we can slowly build that. It doesn't change the fact that it's gonna take a while, but you can get to that first bite, that first response quicker by doing that, and you can build an experience that at least the person engaging with it is like, okay, I'm starting to understand this, I'm starting to grok what you're doing here, but you really need to design for this, and you need to expect that it's gonna take a while, and how do you keep users engaged? Nobody wants to wait 7 seconds. I remember, you know, at a prior life, we thought that we were losing $30 million because one of our pages was taking 7 seconds to load, and so we spent a year getting that down to 1 second. Right? And so like there is a huge amount of money, of success on the table here when it comes to performance, and you're gonna have to work through that, you know, with whatever product that you build. Lastly, or not lastly, here I want to talk a little about cost. LLM technology, it's pretty expensive. It's like really not uncommon to run, you know, a chain of sort of prompts that you need to do. It might even cost $1, you know, more than that for a single user to interact with something. It may not sound like a lot. It's a huge amount of money compared to the cost of doing a normal server response. And so you're gonna get into the situation where it's like, okay, how do we make sure that, you know, we're able to spend this sort of money? You know, maybe it's also internal tools as well on that front. And I think the thing that, you know, is pretty common as you sort of like think about tech is that like, as long as the value is there, then you can, you know, offset that sort of cost, right? And so what you really need to think about is, you know, what is the high level of value that you can get from this cost? And does it actually outweigh the amount of money you're spending on it? You know, I have this like example that happened last week. One of my engineering directors, right, doesn't really write code. He's like prototyping a couple of new products. You know, and we get a flag from finance or whatever it was, and it's like, hey, like, he spent like $700 on like a coding agent over the last month and a half to like get this prototype up and running. And he's like, is this okay? Like, is this a big deal? And I was like, okay, well, how many engineers would that have taken? It's like probably 2, 3 engineers. Probably gonna cost tens of thousands of dollars, way more than that realistically if you think about all the other stuff that comes into play with it. And so like the idea that we're spending $200 for an entire prototype over a month instead of multiple engineers is insane. Like that value difference is huge. And so yes, it seems pretty expensive that you're like, yeah, I spent $100, $200 in like 2 weeks, but that's like really nothing compared to the value. But again, that comes back then to that prompt, which is that whatever you're building, whatever you're doing, it has to have that value. And so you don't want to get on these showy things that are also expensive where you burn money, and then you're not getting anything in return for that. And so I do really think it's something to sort of keep in mind that like when you hit that thing where you're just like, hey, we need to turn this off, we need to stop people from using this because it's costing us so much money, you turn that around and figure out, okay, cool, like where's that value on that? You know, how do we sort of convert that into, you know, whatever the value is that our customers getting? And then lastly, I'll just make a quick nod at this. Airtable is a B2B. You know, we build for some of the largest companies in the world, and so one of the things that we constantly run into is that like every CEO, every leader is just like, AI is the future. Like if we don't change now, we're dead. We're going to change the world, whatever it is. And then you're like, cool, no problem. Say like, can we turn this on? Can we turn this on for your customers? Security, compliance, legal, whatever, whoever it is. Absolutely not. Like, there's no way that I will let you turn on AI. And I'm sure this is true for most of you. Anyone here that works, even in small companies, but definitely large companies, you want access to these tools, you're like, like we can't do that for whatever reason. And so I think it is really, really important for all of you to think about the types of ways in which you can build a product that allows you to work within the frameworks, understand the risks that they're willing to take, understand the concerns that they have, and really meet them where they need to be. Some of the things that we've kind of seen and have proven really important, model flexibility, right? Certain companies want certain things, they want it to be on a specific VPC or on Amazon, so we can do it in Bedrock, keep it all in one place. They definitely want zero-day retention. Nobody wants their data to be ingested into these tools because that's their, in most cases, their unique sort of moat between the rest of it. So meet them where they is. Maybe they need to have keys that they bring to you, whatever it is, figure that out. Good data controls, put in place like, what can I do with this? Who's allowed to use it? Where am I allowed to do this? And so we enable people to do it on a per app basis, certain workflows. And then lastly, and I will just finish on this, is again, is like have the value. It is way easier for somebody to take a risk when the value of what they get out of it is extremely high. If you go to an executive buyer, if you go to a business leader and you're like, hey, I will change the way that you run your business, I will enable you to be more successful, they're gonna be way more likely to say like, I'm gonna go and cut through this, like I'm gonna go and deal with security, with IT and all the rest of it, but you gotta have that value. Nobody's gonna take a big risk if they're just like, I don't know that this makes a difference. And so starting there will really, really help. On that, I'll finish. Again, just to replay, kind of everything that I kind of covered here. We're in a position now, and this is the fun part of it, which is like everything that we have known is changing right now. You get to invent those new best practices. Don't rely on what you currently know. Take a step back. Figure out what the next one is, right? Like you may be in a position where like you get to invent the new way that people interact with products 5 years from now. It doesn't happen very often. It's a really, really awesome opportunity to do that instead of relying on like what we think is right and what we think is safe. Play, don't design. Really, really do play. I've heard a ton of people use that word today. I imagine a lot more people will. Play with these sort of tools. Play with the sort of systems that are in there. It will make a massive difference into capabilities. And then lastly, plan for productionization. You're going to have something that looks really incredible in a day, and then it's going to be awful in a month, and then it's going to take 6 months and a year to be really, really great. And that's the way that these things go. And so really plan for that and make sure that you're able to understand and make that difference clear. And with that, thank you. Appreciate you all listening and hope this has been helpful.
Jimmy, that was fantastic. Thank you. Have a couple questions for you, as you might expect. So as far as, like playing as you learn, as far as non-deterministic models are concerned, like you covered a good amount of ground there in your presentation. So I think we're gonna have a lot of follow-ups here. I think just to kind of jump off here, like I think there's a very poignant question around like, how do you know where to start or what problem you're gonna solve for when in the step of like getting it to work?
I think part of that is, if you have a good strategy, if you understand what is your company trying to accomplish, what are you trying to do, starting there, right? Because it's not just, can I just play with the tool and figure out anything that's possible? It's like, what is like unique to us, right? Like you have a persona that you're building for, you have a problem that you're trying to solve, whatever it is, even at a higher level, engage kind of in that space. Don't go off the beaten track to be like, oh, I know that LLMs can do this, so I'm just gonna build that into our product. But really start from the point of view of like, okay, cool, like what is unique about your product? What is unique about your customers? And actually start with there. What data do you have? What sorts of workflows do you start to build in? And play in that space, and don't kind of come to that preconception. And I think that's the sort of area in which like you want to separate the sort of like, well, I know I can do X and Y, to, well, what else can we do? Like what else is like potentially possible? It's playing in that space where I think you're going to take some like interesting insights and then be able to sort of like go down that path instead of a path that you might have gone on otherwise.
Love that. Just kind of curious, like from a concrete perspective, can you cite an example of an evaluation?
Yeah, there's a million. I mean, generally.
I know, it's a little micro macro.
I mean, the way that I would reason about it is that you can essentially just say like, hey, like given some set of literally, okay, if it's just a prompt engine, right, you can just say like, hey, somebody's going to type in this message. What is the kind of output of that? So for us, for example, you know, some of the evals that we have, and we have a lot of them, I think thousands of them at this point. I don't remember the last number of it, but essentially like, we have automations, right? And so somebody might be like, hey, I want you to email someone every week. Somebody else might be like, hey, on a Friday, I want you to go and send a message to these people. Right? And you sort of start to build up, like, what are the different ways in which people might interact and say similar types of things to get a similar end? And how do you start to build in the sort of evaluations that when somebody asks you to do something in that way, that you can then funnel it that way, right? It's different from like, you know, if you did it in the traditional sort of like unit testing, it's like, well, if somebody puts in the number 10, I know the answer is going to be 100. Right, 10 is never going to change. 10 might change, but you know 100 is going to be there. And this way, because a lot of it is natural language, you're going to see a lot of variation in the way that people speak and the way that people ask for similar things. And how do you like categorize that and evaluate them to the same sort of output? So that's the sort of way that you'll expect it to come. And it varies depending on the type of product you're building, but normally it is essentially like what's the type of way that you would ask an LLM, and then what are the sort of output that you would expect based off of that type of ask.
Sure, like now we're back to non-deterministic, right?
Exactly.
So one question that's come up a couple times is, you know, we've got a lot of horsepower, a lot of compute behind these AI capabilities, and there's the thought of understanding that they're really powerful and they can do a lot of things, but also like, how do you address the organic nature of people like leveraging those capabilities?
I have two answers to this. It is true. Like I strongly believe, and I think it will be true that like a year or two from now, people will understand how to engage with this technology, and so like the teaching aspect will become easier. Like they'll just engage with it, right?
Sure.
The difference, though, now is that, like, well, you want to be the product that gets people to that point. Like, you don't want to be the person who waits, because if you wait, well, you become irrelevant, and so somebody else has kind of come in and done that. And so, like, I do think it's true that, like, there's this idea that, like, people will organically start to engage with this. Really, that organic means that, no, actually, somebody else has figured it out before you. And so that's the way that, you know, you sort of want to be ahead of that, or at least at the forefront of that, really engaging to try to figure that out, you know, for yourself and your teams as well, and not wait a couple years to be like, oh yeah, cool, we can do that as well.
Yeah. Right. So given your purview, right, like it's all things product development, product management, engineering, design, just kind of curious because we have a lot of designers here in the audience, like are there certain tools or products that you would recommend people kind of get started in that journey to harnessing all things AI with?
Totally, and I think there's two versions of this. One, there's like the tools that are like unique to your craft, right? Like there are a ton of things that you can use to like do your design work better. That I think is like a given. Like definitely engage in those. I actually think that the thing that I would push more folks is to like take a step back from that and actually engage with the technology itself, right? And so like even if you just want to go and like throw into like any of these tools, right? Go into Claude, go into GPT, go into an API, whatever it is, and engage directly with like a prompt. I think that's where I think a lot of design should really be focused, right? Because you don't want to be in a position where like you're just being informed by other people like, hey, this is what it can do. You want to go and figure that out for yourself, because without that, you're going to really narrow in the potential space. And so really just go and get as close to it as possible. Said it a couple times today, like prompts are not that scary. They're pretty boring. They're not very interesting. They're annoying to write, but they're not inherently difficult if you start to engage with it. And so if you are not writing prompts or engaging like directly with the LLMs, like that is where I would push people exactly to go to, you know, today.
All right, and then one final question here, which is kind of associated with, I mean, I'll just say it, all things vibe coding. How would you recommend like UX folks or designers kind of lean in on that capacity and learn just enough to be effective in that capacity?
I am sure that every designer here has probably made a prototype at some point. You know that the higher the fidelity is, the harder it is, because what essentially happens, someone's like, oh, awesome, you're done. Like, we're good on that front. As far as vibe coding goes, I would take it in the same way, which is that like, you should use this as a way to explore. You know, I think that there's a lot of sort of belief right now. It's like, oh, cool, I'm going to get to that like production website, production product, production whatever. You're not going to. That may change in years from now. I'm sure that the technology will get better. But today, you could make something pretty bad that like the minute you give it to real users or the minute you have 100,000 users, it's over on that front. And so the way I would interact with vibe coding is exactly that. Like, how do I get ideas out really quickly? Like, what is a really cool thing that I can try here? and then put it to the side and then start again and do it in this sort of like more legitimate way. And that isn't to say that you shouldn't use LLMs for writing code, but there's a big difference between vibe coding and actually using the technology to build, sustainable, good architecture that will actually scale with, whatever problems that you have as a business.
Awesome. Jimmy, thank you so much for your presentation today. We covered a ton of really great ground. Thank you.